Okay, everything should be good to go now. So, hi folks, my name is Dennis, and I live in beautiful, sunny Southern California, where we do indeed have seasons. We just have one shitty one for about 11 months out of the year, and then a solid 4 weeks when water falls from the sky and everyone in LA drives like they've spontaneously lost control of their hands and their feet. Now, I live over here in the Los Angeles metropolitan region, where you can get Thai food, Mexican food, Chinese food, and it's all within walking distance, but you drove there anyway because it's LA, and nobody walks in LA. So, according to the Interactive United States Köppen Climate Classification Map, I live in a CSB class climate, meaning a warm summer Mediterranean climate. This is defined by our coldest months averaging above freezing, and all months averaging at 71.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and at least 3 times as much water in our wettest winter months than our driest summer months, and our driest summer months will only be receiving on average 1.2 inches of rain annually. Although I'm sure with our impending climate catastrophe, we're gonna get bumped up to that hot summer Mediterranean any day now. But as you can see, Southern California has a nice set of climates. Semi-cold arid, hot semi-arid, cold desert, and a shit ton of hot desert. But if you take a look at the satellite picture, you'll notice a lovely green emerald spot and a blue inland sea. Now, I'm sure you are well aware of this. This is the Salton Sea and the Imperial Valley. I'm also sure that you've heard the story of how the Salton Sea was formed by water being diverted and it broke a levee, and it filled an ancient inland sea. Then, of course, you can forget all those wacky stories of how people tried to make it a resort and it just ended up being gross. But the story of how that water got there usually isn't told, and neither is the story of how water got into Southern California in general. Who brought all this water here? What was their motivation? And was there racism involved? I only asked that last part because yes, indeed, there was racism involved. So without further ado, let's dive right into this topic. Dive. It's a water pun. Our story begins in prehistory. There was once a giant inland sea that covered most of Southern California. It was fed by the Colorado River, and the delta reached the Gulf of California. This sea eventually dried up, but there is evidence that suggests that the sea would fill up and then dry up again periodically over the years. Now, let's jump forward several thousand years. Prior to the invasion by the Spanish, this area was occupied by the Cahuilla people. According to their oral tradition, they arrived when there was a giant lake occupying the land, which is now referred to as Cahuilla Lake. For now, the Cahuilla people are just going to be a footnote in this story, but trust me, they make up a very significant part of the story for a future video. So I hate to do this to you again, but let's jump forward yet again, several hundred years this time. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, the Imperial Valley of California saw vast changes in the landscape. White businessmen from the East, colloquially known as Anglos by the Mexicans and Native American inhabitants, saw the vast desert of the Imperial Valley as untouched land ready to be conquered. You see, much of the drive to eco-colonize the Imperial Valley was to tame the wildlands that the Anglos believed that the Mexicans and Native American inhabitants were wasting. At the turn of the 20th century, Charles Rockwood, an engineering student dropout, was hired by a speculative venture group to survey a route to divert the Colorado River east. He, however, found the project to be unrealistic and instead convinced the group to divert the water west into the desert valley. They began to look for investors on the East Coast and chartered a company, the California Development Company, or the CDC. The plan to divert that water was not without its own difficulties. The canal would need to go through land in Mexico, which forbade foreign companies to do work in border regions. Despite this, the CDC worked with the Mexican consul Guillermo Andrade to lease his land in the Baja region, and they also set up a subsidiary of their company in Mexico, La Sociedad de Irrigación y Terreno de la Baja California S.A. That was a little difficult for me to do. Sorry, Spanish was my second language, and I learned it in high school, so I guess I'm fucking canceled or something, right? The CDC began to lose money and interest in the project, though this was around the time that William Smith's book, The Conquest of the Arid America, was published. This book urged the federal government to invest in Rockwood's various projects to divert water to the Imperial Valley. It did get investors and the federal government more interested in the project, and Rockwood's endeavor was eventually successful. By 1900, George Chafee of the CDC created the Imperial Land Company, which worked to advertise the newly eco-colonized land to homesteaders and to sell water stock. If you live in the area, you may be aware of who Chafee is. There are streets, a bridge, and a college named after him, and his statue is in the Upland Civic Center. Chafee can kind of be considered the Imperial Valley's Mulholland before Mulholland, except Chafee's catastrophic flood left more of an interesting footnote in California history, where Mulholland, did not. Don't worry, we're gonna go over that guy in another future video. The Imperial Land Company held the rights to survey and sell town property, as well as invest in utilities, and had the railroad right-of-ways. The explosion of interest in the region brought with it both legitimate homesteaders and crooks looking to exploit the system for quick cash. Many homesteaders did not live in the desert region, but simply bought water stock after making a quick visit to the desert. In 1902, Harrison Gary Otis, the publisher of the Los Angeles Times, and a handful of investors created the California-Mexico Land and Cattle Company, or C&M Ranch. Later, this group would also form the Colorado River Land Company, or the CRLC, which bought 832,377 square acres of Mexicali Valley from Guillermo Andrade, effectively owning most of the Imperial Valley. The CRLC initially used the land for cattle farming, but they changed their business to cotton. These cotton fields were tended by Chinese immigrants who lived as tenant farmers on ranches. At the time, it was still illegal for Chinese immigrants to own any land, and for all Asians to become naturalized citizens according to the Naturalization Act of 1790. During this time, there was also some anti-Mexican sentiment, and spoiler alert, it doesn't go away. The Anglos feared that the Mexicans would be permanent foreigners and nationalists. To curb this fear, the CRLC leased more land to South Asians, who were called the catch-all term Hindus, and to Japanese immigrants rather than Mexican immigrants. The South Asian immigrants were actually particularly successful in their work on cotton fields. A majority of these South Asian immigrants were Sikhs and compared the Imperial Valley to their homeland in the Punjabi Desert. Many had also experience in cotton cultivation, being workers in British India's large-scale crops. Later, many of these Punjabi men would marry Mexican women, and there is still a very small Punjabi-Mexican population in the area. Now, I know I'm setting you up for a lot, but we'll go over that in another video because it actually is a very fascinating topic. But for now, we're going to focus more on water and racism. As World War I began, there was a fear of foreign espionage amongst Americans. They turned their paranoia towards the South Asian immigrants who were seen as a potential menace to society. There was also a growing anti-South Asian sentiment towards them, as their crops were typically more successful than their white neighbors. In 1913, California passed the Alien Land Law Act, which limited the Japanese-owned farms in the region to just 3-year leases. The Japanese were also denied citizenship for the same reason as the Chinese. They were not free Caucasian men. Now, South Asian immigrants did argue that they were indeed Caucasian, and yes, they are. However, the Supreme Court still denied them citizenship because they could not be considered white. So, despite all of this colonizing, Anglo homesteaders really did believe that this was some sort of grand expression of egalitarianism, pointing to the laws regarding water rights and homesteading as proof, and ignoring all of the laws that did not grant the same rights to women or non-white races. Now, the myth of egalitarianism through homesteading was perpetuated by the novel The Winning of Barbara Worth by Harold Bell Wright, and published in 1911. Wright's novel takes the perspective of environmental colonizers in the Imperial Valley, describing the land, Mexicans, and native inhabitants as untamed. The novel is riddled with the white man's burden, justifying the control of the valley as a way to harness its wasted potential. And the racial minorities' characters' roles were mainly just to be subservient to the white protagonists. The winning of Barbara Worth's message championed unregulated capitalism and the philosophy of individualism, two topics gaining quite a lot of steam at the time. It was adapted into one of the most popular American silent films of all time. And seeing as the other most popular American silent film is Birth of a Nation, you can kind of guess what the mindset of the audience was. The novel was also noted by Ronald Reagan as one of his favorite books because of its message about private capital and individualism. The Anglos' colonization of the Imperial Valley created an Eden in the middle of a desert and a green emerald in a sea of sand. The economy of the area boomed as homesteaders bought water stocks and farms grew. But this mythical land flourished because of unregulated capitalism and off the backs of Asian immigrants who were not able to own any land or become citizens. The taming of the Wild West was won by white men, fulfilling a neo-Jeffersonian idea of making the land free for the new settlers. Now, you didn't really think that race or income inequality would be so involved in the story, now did you? Well, think again, because when it comes to California history, there's actually quite a lot that has to do with race and class inequality. And it's only getting started. So that's part one of this series about water here in Southern California. I have some other ideas for videos, but they also involve California. I don't want to go all Huell Hauser on you and make this a California history-centric channel, but when you get a degree in ethnic studies from a Californian university, you learn a surprising lot about California. So that's it for me today. And until next time, take care and goodbye. I don't want to go all Huell Hauser on you and make this a California history-centric channel. That's amazing! Look at that! Luis! That is amazing. That's my best Huell Hauser. My god. What the fuck?